So hello and welcome to another video on Holism Evolution. My name is Philip Merkin, and this video is going to be presenting 3 examples of people who claim to be enlightened and one person who miraculously was offered enlightenment and who turned it down. So that's Jordan Peterson, and then the 3 others who I'll introduce to you shortly. They claim to be enlightened, and I'm going to play for you video clips of 2 of them, of their stories, of their experience of becoming enlightened. And the third one, just read a few words of what he has to say. And I'll show a video clip of Jordan Peterson describing his offer for enlightenment. So this is not a self-help about how you can become enlightened. It's not even going to give you steps on the process, because as you'll see in all the cases, it's completely individual. It's simply to give an indication of where humanity is heading. And from an educational or a psychological or just a general human interest perspective, it helps us to get a bit of a sense of the progress. So I'm going to first of all run through with you Holism Evolution, just some basic ideas on Holism Evolution, so that you understand what I'm meaning by these various evolutionary steps. And then we'll go to these 4 gentlemen and see what they have to say. Now, you'll have to forgive me for my particular choice of folk. These 4 gentlemen are the only people that I'm aware of who have put their stories out into the public domain. So I'm sure there are many women who have done the same, and from many different cultures and races and groups and so on. But unfortunately, I don't have those at my disposal. If any of you do, I would be most grateful if you would share those in the comments, because I would obviously like access to those as well. So Jordan Peterson, Ekhart Tolle, Adiashanti, and Sadguru are all extremely well known in their area and by folk who follow them, all for some kind of human development, and they share their stories. So the first thing, as I said, I'm going to share with you some of the background to Holism Evolution and how we visualize progress as a result. So after the Big Bang, energy came into the world and fairly quickly condensed into matter. But matter was really just at a kind of a primal state, and it evolved through the stars and so on in the early stages of the universe. And eventually conditions came right that matter in an incredible, perfected form can manifest, as we see here in these examples of minerals here from Earth. Once matter had perfected its evolutionary state, the conditions were right for life to manifest. And life, of course, as we all know, has been through its evolutionary phases and has manifested and does manifest some extraordinary pictures of unbelievable perfection once again. And so every level has a beginning, has an evolution, and some degree of perfection that's arrived. Now, the animal kingdom is no different. The animal kingdom different from the plant in that there is self-consciousness in some way. There's an active consciousness of movement and direction and intention. And again, enormous perfection even in simple animal life, but particularly in the higher animal life. And here we have examples of birds and mammals who are warm-blooded and as a result have a much greater independence of nature than the cold-blooded animals. They can be in environments because which cold-blooded animals simply can't, because they can keep their warmth, which the other non-warm-blooded animals have to derive from their environment. And so there is a growing independence in this evolutionary sequence. And the higher animals have achieved a degree of unbelievable specialization and perfection. But it also traps them in their body. A cheetah can't wake up one morning and decide it wants to be vegetarian. Its body, everything about its body, everything about its mind are perfectly attuned, as is the case for all the higher animals. But when we reach the human being, we find that that degree of perfection has been generalized. Our hands, everything about our body is unspecialized. It's a generalist body. And so we specialize through the mind. And we have been given this extraordinary capacity for freedom and independence to specialize out of ourselves because of this generalist body that we have been gifted. And so if you imagine the leap from each stage that I've gone through, and then try and imagine where might the next stage be. So we've got this growing self, as I call us, this human personality, and we're going to be moving into something else. And the leap, if holism evolution is an accurate way of looking at reality, then the leap from our current state to the next state ought to be similar in degree and magnitude as that from the animal to the human, or from the plant to the animal, and so on. So that's where you can start developing your instincts here for holism evolution. All right, so this is Jordan Peterson's offer for awakening. As I've said, this is, they're not, all these examples, they're very different. Don't try and think that you're going to get the keys for your own life, because I don't believe that's the case. These are all different, and yours will be different too. But pay attention to this, what I call the growing self, what I call the human sense of identity and concept of self. And try and get a feeling for how each of these four characters discuss this, because interestingly, all four of them give us a picture of this relationship they have to their own self and to this new sense of self that I believe is the next state of human evolution. So let's have a listen to Jordan Peterson.
Inside the theater of my imagination, I could feel the sky opening up. Now, it wasn't the sky. It was, I would say, the only way I can really think about it was something like another dimension. And then I could feel this force descend upon me, which I think was something that, would have been considered classically something like the Holy Ghost, I suppose. And it filled me with this intense sense of paradisal, I don't know how to say it. Well, it was like being in heaven for some brief period of time, and I could feel myself transformed, transmuted as a consequence of this experience. And it was as if I was in the presence of something that was living, and I suppose that was the experience of God, if you were to put it that way. That certainly what it seemed like. And I felt that I could live that way. I could live transfigured like that permanently if I desired it. And I thought, my God, I wouldn't be able to walk down the street in this sort of elevated state, let's say. I don't know how I would act. I don't know how I would interact with people. I don't know how people would interact with me. I just don't think that I could do it. And then I felt that whatever had descended, it seemed that as if it was sorrowful, and it departed from me slowly, and with no punitive intent, and I wouldn't say with any dissatisfaction. It was as if a gift had been offered that I wasn't in no position to receive.
So that's Jordan Peterson's story. You'll notice at the bottom I've written there one key. So this is something that precedes it. If you want to click on the link there, you'll get the whole video, and the video starts with him saying how he had been concentrating hard on a mandala. I'm not quite sure which mandala, but he'd been doing it for some period of time. So there was something of a concentration of his mental efforts. Now, I know that he's a controversial person. Some people love him, some people hate him. And they have their reasons, of course, but there's no doubt that he has a profound mind and has an extraordinary power of mental presence. And I think that has something to do with his being offered. All right, so enough on Jordan Peterson. Let's move to Sadguru. For those of you who don't know, he is quite a big figure on the internet. And again, there's the link to this particular TED Talk. And I'll just mention his key now before we start. At the start of this video, he talks about as a child always feeling like he was ignorant. He didn't know anything. So he gave everything very close attention. And that's his words. I had to pay enormous attention, whereas everybody else thought they understood stuff and overlooked it. So I think that's quite an important key, a little bit like Jordan Peterson's idea. But you'll hear his story completely different.
I went up and sat in a rock there. Till that moment in my life, I always thought this is me, and that's somebody else and something else. But for the first time, I did not know which is me and which is not me. Suddenly, what was me was just all over the place. The very rock on which I was sitting, the air that I breathe, the very atmosphere around me. I had just exploded into everything. That sounds like utter insanity. This, I thought, lasted for 10 to 15 minutes. But when I came back to my normal consciousness, I was about 4.5 hours. I was sitting there, fully conscious, eyes open, but time had just flipped in my experience. For the first time in my adult life, tears were flowing down. And I've always been peaceful and happy. That was not an issue. But here I was drenched in a completely different kind of blissfulness, every cell in my body bursting with ecstasy. When I shook my head and trying to get some logical explanation for what's happening to me, the only thing that my very smart mind could say was, maybe I'm just going off my rocker. This experience, as it deepened and it started repeating itself, if I just sit here, what is moments for me seem to be hours for others. I think it's a minute, hours are gone. On a certain day, I happened to be sitting in a certain place. I actually thought it's about 25, 30 minutes. But when I came to my normal senses, 13 days had gone by. I was sitting right there. India being what it is, a whole crowd had gathered, garlands around my neck, people touching my feet. Somebody wants to know what will happen to his business. Somebody wants to know when his daughter will get married. All the things that I hated were just happening around me. And I had to move away from this place just to avoid this crowd around me. And as this experience deepened into me, one thing that happened to me was everything that I believed was me suddenly was not me. This was always me. And suddenly I found this is just an accumulation of food that I've eaten. What I accumulate can be mine, but can never be me. This was just a huge heap of impressions in my mind. And this body and mind, not being me, but just being mine, a distance arose between me and my body, between me and my mind.
All right, so that's Sadhguru's story. And again, you can click on that link. Well, you'd have to copy it and watch his full story. Fascinating to watch. So Eckhart Tolle, a very different story and a very different person. And his key, and he says it in this video, he didn't like who he was. He wasn't happy with his life. He found himself to be unhappy and just not wanting to be himself. And again, I would imagine he spent a lot of time in presence. He doesn't speak so directly about it as the other two, but I imagine he must have, because there's something, and if you listen to the way he talks in the transformation, an extraordinary amount of presence that he must have brought into this awareness. Let's have a listen.
Sentence, I cannot live with myself any longer, seemed so strange because there seemed to be two people there, the I and the self. And that was so strange that I was wondering, who am I if I can't live with myself? And that simple question, who am I, led to a realization of the essence of I and what I means. And the I realized, is not my thoughts. So I disidentified from the unhappy self that was telling itself unhappy stories all the time. And so the sense of I was no longer lodged in thought. It removed itself from thought because it just couldn't stand it anymore. Simple as that. That's why it happened. It couldn't stand it anymore. It removed itself. It was too painful. And all was left was that the sense of I-ness, of beingness, of presence, which is inherently peaceful, which has no problems in it, is timeless. And that is the true source of everybody's identity. The true source of the being is the formless. And then the self that consisted of thinking, identification with thinking, couldn't survive the sense of self that was no longer invested with the identification. So the unhappy me, as I called it later, dissolved. It was left with just the I presence. It seemed so simple. But even that I couldn't have explained at the time. It took years before I could verbalize something like this.
So that's Eckhart Tolle's story for me is a fascinating one, because there are so many people who have and describe very similar experiences and are often living with excruciating pain because of this lack of identifying of self with self. And Eckhart Tolle seems to have a possible pathway out of that and into something quite blessed and blissful. So his story, I think, very fascinating for those of you who have a general interest in humanity and psychology and human development and managing challenges. All right, our final example is Adiashanti. He describes his awakening, and I'll just read it. At the moment of awakening, there was no emotion in it. It was just the pure seeing of what is. When there was the pure seeing of what is, unclouded by emotional content, there was a freedom and incredible sense of fearlessness and release from not being confined to the dream of a separate I. Then one day something dropped away. It suddenly hit me that what had fallen away was all identity. Identity itself had collapsed. Right, so I've condensed a whole bunch of things that he said and got rid of stuff in between to make my own sentence. Please go to the site that mentioned and you'll get it all in much more detail. So that's all I want to share with these extraordinary human beings who have had these experiences, and just say a couple of last words to say what what is kind of a takeaway we can take. And it looks like an incredible sense of presence and an incredible sense of awareness and self-awareness, and because of this incredible self-awareness and holding the self-awareness, it's a little bit like holding in place our thinking, because many of them mention thinking and thoughts, our feelings or emotions. Adiashanti points very strongly and clearly to that, as do some of the others. And if one can hold that in a sense of a release from attachment or identity, and that's kind of Buddhist and Christian language, then something new seems to be able to be received. And so that's the best I can say in terms of holism evolution, that there is something about who and what we are at present and our identity. And you can go back and watch what these guys say, go and watch the original clips, and you'll get a feeling for precisely some of those dynamics of what will happen in this release from thinking we are who we are to releasing ourselves from attachment to that and opening up that opportunity for this next stage of becoming what I call the spirit self, and is named things like Enlightenment in Buddhism, the Holy Spirit in Christianity, paradise or heaven in Judaism and Islam, Atman in Hinduism, and so on. There are many, many names. And humanity's the greatest of humanity have known about this for at least 2,500 years, if not before. So it does look like this is something of an ongoing evolutionary path that is available for us if we take it seriously and give it the kind of attention that I believe it is asking from us. So thank you very much. I hope that was interesting for you. Please post your comments and watch other Holism Evolution videos. It is a whole way of looking at reality, and I think it can inform us for our educational needs. As I said, education is something which we've lost our way, if we're completely honest about it. We don't know where humanity is going. We're distracted by all these incredible technologies that we are developing, and concerned that human beings have to adapt to meet them. And of course we do. But of course we also have our own evolution that we need to look to. And that's where Holism Evolution, I think, can give us some key pointers for understanding ourselves in the present and understanding where we're heading. So thank you very much. And please post comments and watch other Holism Evolution videos.